we're going to be talking today about stories. Why tell stories? Well, we touched on that last week. First of all, stories capture attention and build relationships. And let's talk about for a moment that the stories can be told on websites, they can be told at events, and certainly can be told in networking meetings, and can be told when you're in front of a client. And that is the real key. But in terms of networking meetings, they do capture attention, and your stories build relationships. Just as we've just told stories, things you don't know about each other. I've suddenly discovered that Rebecca is a drone. She's taking a drone test, and having passed mine, I can tell her that it's a doddle because you can look up the answers while you're doing the test. But stories are captivating. They are much better than canned or scripted presentations. And how do you feel when somebody comes onto a live meeting or a Zoom meeting and they read something? It's just not authentic. So telling stories, telling your own stories, being yourself is so important. People are more likely to remember stories than they are facts. And stories are contagious. You won't remember facts, or you remember very few facts, and facts can get changed over time. But a story becomes contagious, because just like you hear a joke and you're able to relay it, when you've heard a story from somebody on this meeting or from a particular person, when you're introducing that person or telling somebody else about that person, you can perhaps tell a story that's resonated in your own mind. It connects with the decision-making part of the brain. What do I mean from that? Well, we buy emotionally. We are where we are. We want to be somewhere, and we're going to buy because of how we're going to feel, or how we're going to move away from fear or whatever. And a story helps us do that. It helps us create that emotional bond. We buy on emotion, but we justify on logic. And yet many people try and sell on logic. And I think your legal and your financial people have a tendency towards that, because they're more data driven, they're more fact driven, and they think that that's important. And although it may be in the outcome, in terms of selling that service, it's the emotion that they ought to be developing a story along those lines. It can also increase the value of your product. I told the story a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, about when I was selling to hairdressing salons, and I wasn't a technical person, and I was aware of that, and I was nervous of that. So I would relate almost verbatim what my sales manager had told me, and he was relating what the marketing team had put into the product. And what would happen is that some people would buy probably out of sympathy, and a lot of people wouldn't. And when I went back the following 4 weeks, following month, I would ask those people that bought it, how did you like it? I loved it. What did you particularly like about it? I would ask, rather than say, would you like some more? I did ask that, but I would say, what did you particularly like about it? And they would tell me in their words, and very often they'd tell me uses they'd found, because they were creative people. They would find little snippets of things that the product wasn't necessarily intended for. So when I was able to relate that to other people that hadn't bought it, let me tell you what other people are telling me about this particular product, I was able to expand some of its uses. And you'd be surprised, the people that buy from you, you think they buy for a particular reason, the reason you've given them. But if you're to ask them, it's not necessarily why they have bought, or necessarily why they continue to buy. And if you can find that out, that is quite important. And another reason is it's more fun than slides. Nobody ever gets excited about a canned sales pitch or a Zoom. Nobody ever says that was the most exciting set of PowerPoint slides I've ever heard. But they will relate a story that has excited them, that's interested them, that's made them laugh, or made them have that aha moment. So what stories do you need? Well, there's lots of stories we could tell, and we'll explore these, but One of the key stories, and we're going to move on to this shortly, is when you're introducing yourself. And we've talked previously about the trap we fall into when we ask people to say, what is it you do? And then we pitch in and we say, I'm an accountant, I design websites, etc. And people almost yawn because they've heard and they know of lots of other people that do that. It doesn't differentiate you. So I'm going to explore the way in which you can, in fact, answer that question without saying I'm an accountant, I'm a printer, I'm a funeral director, or whatever. The other stories you need to be thinking about is the stories that you tell yourself, and that's the self-talk. You're always having conversations throughout the day. If you think about it, you're having conversations with yourself, and you're telling yourself why you can't do things or why you shouldn't do things. And a lot of those stories are not true because they're born out of one thing or a couple of things that happened when you were a youngster, or something that happened next week that put you off from doing something, whether that is reaching out to new people, whether it's establishing a more profitable price for your business, why it's stopping you from picking the phone up, because we'll make something up, and well, because they'll be having their tea or whatever. Sunday's not a good time to call. 6 o'clock's not a good time to call, or whatever. So there's lots of stories we tell ourselves, or who's going to be interested in my story? So the stories we tell ourselves are quite interesting. But a really key one is getting buyers to actually tell their story. We come along and we're talking about providing solutions to people's problems. But I guess if you went in to see your doctor and you sat down and the doctor suddenly prescribe yourself something, you wouldn't think much of that doctor, because you have to tell him your story about why you're there. What's the problem? How is it manifesting itself, etc. So to go along and think you can sell your stuff to everybody and anybody without any meaningful conversation is a bit of a myth. It's a trap we might fall into that we don't need to fall into. So we need to have the art of getting buyers, prospects, to tell us their story. Now, this is admittedly, and I've been gathering a lot of material for this particular presentation, and I found a really fabulous audio book, and I can't remember the name of it. I've got it on here somewhere. I will come back to you on it. And if you're into Audible, or but if you look at marketing stories, sales stories on Google, you'll come up with a lot of really good content, and which has helped me construct this particular presentation. But they interviewed procurement professionals, so don't get carried away with that. That's buyers. What stories do they want to hear? And if any of these resonate, then make a note and think about how you might use them. How and why the company got founded. Well, I might ask how and why you got started in the business. What drew you into this business? And that could be a really life story which reveals your passion for what you're doing. What do you like about this particular, you could tell people what you love about the business. I've never failed to, I never failed to be amazed about, and not everybody's really good at presenting. The more they do these things, the better they become. But how many people we came across in a B&I environment where people would tell their story in a lackluster fashion, with no tonality, with no excitement, no vibrancy or energy. And there they were trying to relate to, why people should introduce them. And yet they were downbeat, etc. And you begin to wonder whether they were in the right job or whatever. So that could be a way of looking at that. Who you are and what your values are. And values, whatever it is, whether it's commitment, doing things, being reliable, timekeeping, whatever the values that you have, people are subliminally looking for those things. We tend to have rapport with people who share similar values. How and why a particular product was invented. That is, why you do certain things in that way that other people in your other competitors don't do. And stories may be about how the product is made, and those two things are related. And I'm going to now share something that was a story that I told on QVC. One of the things that not many people know is that I was once appearing for 6 months regularly on QVC as a guest. There's a screenshot I took from a video that is available on YouTube. If you want to hear somebody telling a sales story, when I look back at this, I'm quite proud of this, because a pal of mine up in Manchester, his father was a doctor, and he created a product called Knit Nurse. If you've got children, you'll know that traditionally and at certain times of the year, there'll be an outbreak of nits in the school. And we knew that a lot of parents get very, very concerned about that. They think it's a sign of uncleanliness, and it's not. And the challenge that we were having, that the UK was having at the time, there were lots of reports that the products that were out there had what they call organophosphates. They were using pesticides that were created with chemicals that they used to spray crops. And there was a lot of concern amongst doctors and parents, naturally, about spraying chemicals on kids' hair. And my doctor friend had developed a product, a natural product based on neem. And to get the story over, I researched this. I wasn't told this, but I researched neem. And neem is the neem tree is a tree that's found in the Indian subcontinent. Is a natural pesticide. Back in the early 20s, some people spotted, because they would very regularly have plagues of locusts right across India, or that part of India, that would devastate all the foliage or whatever. But they would settle on the neem tree, but not consume it. And they looked into that and found that it was a natural pesticide. It wouldn't kill the locusts, but the locusts would not eat it. So it deterred those insects. And of course, a nit is an insect. And so they introduced neem, a natural ingredient, to this particular product. And therefore, we were able to come up with a natural product rather than a chemical-based product. That was the tenet, that was the main central story. So it's an interesting story that we developed. And here I am explaining that some years ago. So again, that is a story that even now I remember, and this must be 15, 20 years ago, I remember all that time ago. And what a compelling story that is. The product actually got listed in Lloyd's, and SmithKline Beecham or whatever, who owned Night Nurse, put a writ out and said we were trying to pass it off because they had the name Night Nurse. And if we wanted to fight it, the company wanted to fight it, it would cost them a fortune. So they took the product off the market. But I still think it's worthwhile reinventing that. So when people say, what do you do? This is what we ought to be thinking about. Who's the audience you serve? And think of your ideal client, either real or imaginary. Who's your ideal client? And what is it the problem? What problem do they have? And how do you solve that problem? So instead of focusing on what you do, think about the audience. This is one way to approach the subject of what you do. So you could say, well, I'll tell you what I do. When you get when I come across business people that realize that lead generation is important, but they neither have the time nor do they have the personality to reach out to strangers and try and engage them in a conversation. It's very time consuming. And it's very, it's something that a lot of people are afraid of. Well, what I do is I go out onto Google, I find the people on Google to get them to hold their hand up and say, I'd be interested in talking to my client. And then what I do is I present those clients to my clients so that they can then start to have meaningful conversations, and I'll help them with those conversations. So I create lead generation campaigns for businesses that don't have the time to, but realize they need to. Now, can you see how I've sort of twisted that, and I've just done that on the spur of the moment. I should have prepared it. But can you see how that's slightly different than I just do lead generation? It gets the, exactly what I do, and also the emotion of how they're left, what they're facing. So how do you make a difference? How do you add value? How do you make it personal? And what I should have done in the end is, well, I did, what do they say? How do they feel? So it's where you're taking them from and what they're left with. And that might not be easy for you to do, but I'm going to ask you to do that in a second. And then if you were in a networking event, you should, whatever you do, you should always be very specific about who you'd like an introduction to, a particular business category that maybe has had that problem. So even in a simple way, without preparation, you could say, what you want to think about is, who's the audience that you are, choose a specific audience that you are wanting to reach out to. For Rod, it may be an audience of people that are considering, they've maybe recently been involved in a bereavement, or they know somebody that's been bereaved, maybe through COVID, and they've realized that they haven't made any arrangements for their funeral. So how do you get from there, tell a story, and then how to then ask for some business? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come out of that. No, that's not what I want to take that. I'll do that later. Come back out of that. I'm panicking a bit here. Here we are. No, I'm not. Where am I? Oh, stop share. That's at the top. Oh, there we are. Right. So what I'm going to do now, I hope, is are we all there? Can see we're there.
No.
Right, I'm looking for the rooms. Ah, breakout rooms.
We are very well behaved this morning. We're not taking the mickey out of Paul doing this, are we? Perhaps we ought to give him a little bit of stick, just to get stress on him.
Right. It says here I can assign these rooms automatically, assign them manually. I can let participants choose room. Well, that's too complicated for me at the moment. What I want to do now is I'm going to give you 15 minutes. You're going to end up in a room with somebody, and I want you to be well behaved because when you come back, I'm going to ask you at random to relate some of the story that you've just heard. So I want you to focus on story. So rather than rather just saying people what the other person does, what I want you to think about is how you would choose an audience and tell us about how that you've taken somebody from what their problem is, what the common problem is, and how through something you've done in the past or some experience, and you can make it up if you like, you've taken them from where they are now to solving their problem, i.e. winning a client. Does that make sense? Reasonably makes sense. So let's see. Now you'll get a gap of about 15 seconds where it will say, just stay with us. And then you'll be on the, you'll end up with somebody. And just before the call, I'll send you a link. I'll send you a message to say you've got a minute to go or whatever. And then you'll all come back to the room. Let's see if it works. Right.
It's almost like what's not said, but it's kind of in between what's said.
I get that.
Oh, I love the way my brain works. For me, it would translate that it's like Chris loves to be kind of like direct. He's very much a people person in terms of he can be direct and ask the simple questions, but at the same time, there's the other aspect of him which can be more intuitive and creative, and loves to kind of weave in between. He never said any of that, but that's just the impression that I got.
Zoisa was fascinated by why, as in why things happen, why things don't happen. She likes to solve things so she can, and she likes to see the bigger picture. So she'll view a client in lots of different aspects rather than just one specific. Zoisa has the advantage over me, I think, in some ways, that she has a multitude of disciplines that she can bring to the table. And that is an ability in terms of a mental agility that allows her to approach things with a much finer touch. For me, it was a real treat to talk to somebody who is almost entirely intuitive as well.
From what I've got from that is Zoisa doesn't just look at the problem that's in front of her. She looks at about how that has been created, what other areas of the body or the health could that be impacting on. So it's definitely a more holistic approach. But Nick.
Yeah, it was really interesting, actually. Again, in the breakout room, I got to know Mark a lot better than I have done previously. And Mark comes across, he is a guide, and he's in the role he does as a LinkedIn guide. But he showed a really interesting process where he tries to help his clients envisage that they've already achieved what they're trying to achieve. So they've already achieved being successful, and he encourages them to think about how that feels being successful. And then he takes them through the process of what they might have achieved to get to that point. So he's taken them on a journey, and then he brings it all back to the point where he's very much the guide in that process. So they're the hero. They've overcome their problems, they've achieved their goals, they've got to the success, and he's guiding them through that process. And it was the way he articulated it much better than I am now. But
did you get a good feeling as to who would be an ideal client for him?
We didn't really get into that. I think
all right.
And I think because Mark's already using this process a little bit, but he's still trying to flesh it out and polish it. And so I think to a degree, maybe more than the rest of us, he has a bit of a worked up process.
Ewan.
Well, I think it was a really good chat, actually. I found out about Rebecca, that actually Rebecca is very tenacious.
Well, I just got from it that Rebecca's got bigger balls than you think.
And I think the second thing I took from it that we all three agreed was, whatever you do, you have to be true to yourself. And by that, I mean, if you're offering a product or a service and someone wants it to be done differently because that's the way they expect it, and you don't believe in the way that product or service is delivered, you shouldn't deliver it.
That's what came across.
I think sometimes, it's too easy for us to sort of, when someone says no, as we've often said, Paul, it's not no forever. It's just no, not at this moment. Or maybe you need to challenge that no. Why did you say that? What's the reason? There must be, and sometimes it can be financial, sometimes it can be just the wrong timing. Lots of reasons, loads of reasons why people don't buy a funeral plan from me. And 9 out of 10 of them is relevant to their sons and their daughters saying, no, don't do that, mum. That's silly. We'll look after it. Don't worry. Of course, they all forget that, £3,000 to £5,000 is not easy to come by. If I had to ask everybody on this screen, give me £3,500 right now, they'd probably think, shit.
Now, Andrew and Barry were together, two marketing people at other ends of the scale. What did you get from that, guys?
I've known Barry for quite some time, actually.
And he still talks to me.
Well, we've shared many a sausage at 4am breakfast.
Very good.
That's too much information, obviously. Yeah, really fascinating. And I think, to be honest with you, I think we're all guilty of this. We all do things and we don't really realise the value that we bring. We didn't look at it through that other person's prism. And chatting to Barry, he was explaining to me how he was asked to do some thank you cards for somebody who a huge thing for her was to make sure that the paper was recyclable, it was as carbon neutral as possible, and all that type of stuff. And that really, really mattered. And because of that, he went and researched a lot of different papers, substrates, etc., and came out with this fascinating sort of smorgasbord, really, of stuff that was out there they could do. And you know, he did that for her. And when he's telling me this stuff, like, oh yeah, I just did this, and I was like, wow, that's an entire marketing campaign you've got there. Really fascinating.
That's quite a niche, because you could be building a website, or Kelly and Ewan could be building, you know, a digital campaign for somebody that's in that environmental space. So a good question could very well be, you know, about why they're in that space and what they're aiming to do, and what do you do with your printed material? Do you actually use that same ethos with your printing material? And if they said yes or no, you could say, well, actually, you ought to talk to a good friend of mine, Barry, because that's the space that he's in. He's already done the research and he's doing work in that area that I'd love to put you two together. Would you have any objection if I got you two together? That's the way to get a referral for Barry.
The one difference I have from you, which I think is a real point of difference, is you're a consultative printer. That story, for me, tells it exactly. You're not a printer, you're a consultative printer. You will find the best way, from what I understand, to get a job done. And that, I think, is a real, from my experience, now my experience is 10, 15 years old, that's a real point of difference in the print industry.
Andrew made a great story about transitioning a client from a Facebook page, a business startup, to a website. And the lady in question had some, I don't know, it sounded a bit odd to me. I don't buy a lot of crap on the internet. I let the kids do that, you know. But she wanted a shop where stuff was available, and then when it was gone, it was gone. And I just thought, well, it's a bit like a market stall type mentality, you know. You take a box of stuff, you sell it, when it's all gone, you go home. But the transition, the sort of mental process to go from a Facebook seller to someone who actually has an online shop is quite a journey for a small business, particularly a one-man band. And Andrew's way of doing it actually made a lot of sense to me.
It's a very much a price-based industry, or it was when I did it. It was very much price-based. And I think you can take it beyond being price-based by being that, I don't want to use the word partner, but being, especially in agencies, for being that sort of next level of expertise to improve their product. Not about just producing a product, about improving a product.
If I was producing Barry's business card as a marketing person, I'd have Barry Tinton, print buyer. And people would say, well, you know, who are you buying for? People like you that don't know how to.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think, Barry, you are a natural storyteller. Probably you and Rod are the two most natural storytellers in this group here. And I think, and I think in the networking arena, you've got a great opportunity to bring what is a really technical, heavy subject to life with these stories. And I think the storytelling can really show the value that you can add just by dropping in lots of little stories over a period of time.
I'm a petrol head, or in fact, just anything with an engine, really, and wheels. And I used to work in Formula One for a couple of seasons. So I worked all around the world doing Grand Prix for the Paddock Club. And I count myself very lucky. I've managed to get that contract, and I did it for a long time. I thought it was great fun. At the moment, I'm trying to get two championships. One's called Formula E, and the other one's called Extreme E, which is just about to drop. It'll be next month. And Lewis Hamilton's got a team, and Jenson Button's got a team, and it's men and women racing off-road in electric buggies all around the world, and it's carbon neutral. So it's a good championship. And I had a yes last Tuesday from the communications director that she would allow me to come in and see all her colleagues as a bit of stress management relief for them prior to them starting this championship, because obviously they're all under quite a lot of pressure. And I had a yes that she would ring me the next day, and she hasn't. And I want that contract very much, because next year I want to work with these people, and it gives me an opportunity to give them something tangible which will have good benefit individually and also in terms of goodwill. And I've sat on my hands for a whole bloody week, which has pissed me off. Has anyone got any help, intuition? I don't know, anything?
Before anybody does, can I ask you a question? What stopped you?
Not wanting to be too much of a puppy. My natural inclination is I'm full of enthusiasm, I'm full of go, and I'm a mixture between fluffy and very driven. So my natural inclination is to jump straight in there, and I just felt on this occasion that the more pushy I was, the less likely I was to land it. Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah.
Can only be no. The worst case scenario is a no.
Yeah, yeah.
And you
I don't mind
and
that.
you can turn the no round. Why? You know, why is it not a good fit? You know, you've just sold it to me, so I'm sure you can sell it to her because she's the petrol head as well.
Yeah.
Ewan.
I think Rebecca would be a good person to ask, because it's quite similar to what Rebecca had with her person. But I sense the reason you possibly, and I might be completely off the mark, is because you want it so much and you're afraid of getting something in the spokes and stopping it.
I'm very hungry for this.
Sorry?
I'm very hungry for this. Yeah.
Exactly. And think sometimes you're worried about breaking it by doing something. But at the end of the day, if you don't go back, nothing can happen.
What Ewan said just now about saying, being a bit honest in your email, because you've left it a polite week now, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like you're going full in straight away, but saying, oh, just realize it's been a week, and maybe putting a bit of your heart on your sleeve so that she knows that this really, you know, matters to you. You'll definitely get a response, and she'll probably be honest back. She'll say, oh, look, actually the bottom's fallen out of this, or yes, sorry, it's just been hectic.
Nick.
You'll get it.
Yeah, I think, Chris, you've obviously you want this lot, don't you? And I guess you don't want to come across as being desperate, even though you are really keen for it. And I think as Rebecca was saying, I think there's often the reasons why they're not getting back to you are probably really genuine. It's either they're really busy or another priority's come along. And 9 times out of 10, they probably are waiting to engage. They just haven't got to that point yet. And a gentle nudge, sometimes just a polite but kind of direct gentle nudge gets them over. And maybe reassert your value as well.
I think what Rebecca and Nick has said there is, I actually start with an apology. I've got to apologise with you on two counts. First of all, that I've not been back sooner. That's not because I don't value this. I do, but I didn't really want to feel as if I was pestering you. But secondly, I apologise for being so enthusiastic. This project is dear to my heart because of the work I've done with Formula One or Williams or whoever. And I really would love to work with you. And I just wondered where you're up to. And I think that sort of approach, if you can, tease that out in words, that in your own words, I think that would come across. I think the next thing is to say, whatever the outcome, would you be open if, would you mind if we stay in touch? That is valuable, always. Keep that door open. See how that project went, because somebody might decide to go with your competitor or whatever, or not do it. But those circumstances could change in a few months.
Very energizing. And I bought into the power of story before this session today, but I think today has kind of reinforced how important story is, and it's a skill that even if you're not natural at it, I think you need to kind of really work on it and develop it and hone that skill and do it as naturally as you can. But yeah, loved it. Brilliant.
Good, thanks. Well, if other people end up sharing your story, that is what you want. Kelly, Ewan.
For me, I think we've got the classic end to a story here, because we've now got a cliffhanger, because we all want to know what happens to Chris next week.
So I will get on that today, and whatever happens, I'll let you know how it goes next week.
Yeah, superb as usual. I think stories allow us really to dig below the surface of I do X or I do Y, and that really then goes to our point of difference. So very much well.
Good, Rod.
Yeah, I remember someone in BNI Exeter, I think, I don't know what to put in my 10-minute elevated speech, and I just said to them, you know, well, think of 10 things that you've done for customers that they've been pleased about, you know. Just tell the individual stories around those 10 things, and you'll find the 10 minutes will disappear in 60 seconds, as it were, you know, each time. But and that's how that's how I run my business. You know, I do tell stories, and I do try and identify and empathize with the client, and then I try and help the client with other stories that have been told to me that might help them. And you know, there's lots of stories within stories, isn't there, almost, you know. So it's interesting how we do run our businesses and how many times we do utilize stories when we don't probably realize we're doing that. No. Because it's something that's natural.
Good. Thank you very much to everybody. Have a great week. Good luck with Chris, and come back with your stories of your week next week. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers, guys. Have a good one.